Hi there, welcome to Microsoft Azure Training Series. My name is Neeraj Kumar. I'm a cloud evangelist and enterprise architect, and I will be your instructor for this course. Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon wherever you are joining this session from. Welcome to another tips and tricks session. So as an Azure administrator or as an Azure architect, you are sometimes posed with the questions where the organizations want to host an intranet-based application. In other words, they do not want the application to be publicly accessible. When I say publicly accessible, it means that they do not want it to be accessible over the internet. They only want the users within the corporate use the corporate network to connect to the application. And in such cases, we either use the site-to-site VPN or we use the point-to-site VPN. And point-to-site VPN is generally used when the associates are away from the corporate network, but they have been given permissions to access the application when they are connected to the Azure virtual network using the gateway. One another important thing that as an Azure administrator or as an Azure architect you may be tasked with is to make a choice of the VPN client to be used. At times, the organizations might come to you for help asking that what VPN client should be used, and you have to make a choice. I recently came across one such question where I had to make the choice of the VPN client that should be used in the organization. And my choice was Perimeter 81 because it is cost effective, first of all, and second, it is reliable and good for small to medium businesses. One very important point that I would like to make here is I'm not getting paid for promoting Perimeter 81. It's just the choice that I made after my research on the available list of vendors. So Microsoft already has a comprehensive list of vendors and you are free to make any choice out of them. Okay? So in our case, what we are going to do in this session, we will be working on using Perimeter 81 to configure the site-to-site VPN for the intranet application. And what is Perimeter 81? Perimeter 81 is a zero trust cloud-based network as a service designed to simplify secure network for the modern and distributed workforce. So what are the steps that we are going to take? First, we will try to have an overview of private endpoints. We'll try to understand what the private endpoints are, and once we have understood, then we will go ahead and configure the app services web app with the private endpoints. The next step would be to configure the site-to-site VPN in Azure. That is, we are going to create the virtual network gateway in Azure. And on the other side, we are going to configure a gateway and the tunnel on the Perimeter 81 side. Once that is done, we will come back to Azure and create a local network gateway and then create the tunnel between the two of them, so that any user who is connected to site-to-site VPN via Perimeter 81 gateway should be able to access the app services web app. And if they are not connected and they are trying to access the application, they should not be able to reach there. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. So even before we start understanding or have an overview of what the private endpoints are, let me tell you that this is a very brief overview of what private endpoints are. And I will highly encourage you all to go ahead and read more about it, because the more you read, the more you have the knowledge. So Azure Private Endpoint can be considered as a network interface that receives one of the IP addresses from your defined virtual network and connects you privately and securely to a service which is powered by Azure Private Link. This is currently in preview, but so far of my private endpoint experience, they are pretty straightforward and are easy to use. As I mentioned that it uses a private IP address from your VNet, what it is doing is, it is effectively bringing the service into your VNet. Those services could be the app services web app or the Azure storage or the databases. So in our cases, since we are working with the app services web app, let me tell you that we have the app services environment, which brings the app service plan and app services web app, which are the platform as a service, to our virtual network and can be managed from there. So instead of using app services environment, we are making use of the private endpoints. How it is helping us? First of all, it is bringing the app services web app to our VNet. Second, it makes it private so that you can access the web apps only when you are connected to the Azure network via site-to-site VPN or an express route or the point-to-site VPN. The third important factor, and it might be the most important factor as well, is that it brings down the cost. So app services environment is a little costlier, whereas if you are using the private endpoint for your app services web app, it brings down the cost. And what is the private link resource I was talking about? The private link resource is the destination target of a private endpoint. Let us look at some of the details about the private endpoint. Private endpoints enables the connectivity between the consumers from the same virtual network, regionally peered VNets, globally peered VNets, and on-premises using VPN as I just mentioned or the express route, and services powered by private link. The network connections can only be established in a single direction. And also the connections can only be initiated by clients connecting to the private endpoint. The service endpoints do not have any routing configuration to initiate the connections into the service consumers. Private endpoint is created for the life cycle of the resource. A private IP is assigned dynamically to the network interface of the private endpoint from the subnet that maps to the private link resource, and this value of the private IP address remains unchanged for the entire life cycle of the private endpoint. And that is how you use it, right? If the IP addresses are continuously changing, then it's a difficulty, right? The private endpoint must be deployed in the same region as the virtual network, whereas the private link resource can be deployed in a different region than the virtual network and private endpoint. Multiple endpoints can be created on the same or different subnets within the same virtual network. There can be 1000 private endpoints per virtual network, and we can have a maximum of 64,000 private endpoints per subscription. So this was just a brief overview of what the private endpoints are and what are their capabilities, but we will learn more about it when we are actually doing practicals. So we will see more of it in our upcoming demo. So here we are on our Azure portal, and as you can see, I just have one resource, which is the virtual network ATSL. So let's do one thing. Let's go into the resource and see how it is configured. One thing we see is that it has an address space of 10.10.0.0/16. So that is the IP address range that I had given to it. And if I go to subnets, I see that it has a default subnet of 10.10.0.0/24, and I need to create two more subnets here. This default subnet that we have, we can use it to create the virtual machines, which can act as a jump box. But we are not going to touch it for now. Let's create two more subnets here, one for the private endpoints and the other one of the gateway subnet. So we'll first create the subnet for private endpoint. We will give it a name of SNET for subnet, and this will be used for private endpoint of ATCSL apps. So we will give that subnet this name, and the IP address range, it has automatically picked up the next available IP address range. So 10.0.1.0 is by default it has taken. We can change it, but for now we will let it remain like this, and we will click on OK. It's as simple as that. So it will not take much time, and it has completed already. The next step is to create the gateway subnet as we had discussed. Again, it is picking up by default 10.10.2.0/24. What we can do is, instead of 24, I'll give it maybe 28 or something. We don't want so many IP addresses for the gateway, so we will keep it to 28. We could have changed the same thing for the private endpoint, but I let it remain like that. So it will all depend upon the number of the private endpoints that you need. I'll just click on OK, and this will also get deployed very soon. So it is done. So we have 3 subnets here and we are done with the virtual network. Next is we have to create the app services web app. When we are creating the app services web app, we need to create the app service plan. And this is basically the platform as a service, which is completely managed by Microsoft. We are just using the service. Okay, and our intention is to bring this app services web app into our virtual network so that we can manage it to a certain extent that we want. People using public internet cannot access this app services web app. So the first thing we are going to do is to create the app service plan. Here I'm going to choose the resource group again. I'll choose the name for it, which is the app service plan for ATCSL. That is what the name I'll give for now. I'll choose the operating system to Windows. I'll let the region remain as Central US because that is where all my resources will be. I'll scroll down a little, and one very important point to mention here is that the private endpoint will not work when you have the SKU and size of standard S1. You need to change to premium 2. So I'll click on change size. And here, if you see, by default, S1 is selected. We are going to click on P1V2. That's the lowest on Premium 2. Okay, so this is Premium version 2, P1V2. That is what we are going to choose. We'll click on Apply. And once that is done, we will click on Review plus Create. And once that has been validated completely, we will click on Create again. So it hardly took any time and it got deployed. So we are done with this. Now that the app service plan is ready, we need to create the app services web app. So we will click on app services and then we'll click on add. Once we are on that page, we again need to choose the resource group, which is the RG-ATCSL, and we will give this app a name. Let us give it ATCSL app. And it is available. So atcslapp.azurewebsites.net. That's the fully qualified domain name which we initially get from Azure. Okay. And for the publishing, we'll let it remain to code. For runtime stack, I can choose anything. Let me choose ASP.NET version 4.7. And the region is Central US. Scroll down a little. If you see the Windows plan, which is the Central US, it will automatically pick up App Service Plan ATCSL, the one that we had created earlier. Okay, so no need to change here. We'll click on Next Monitoring. So Application Insights will keep it to yes. It's another very good feature of Azure for the applications that you are going to deploy, because this Application Insights will provide you the details about the errors and other logs from the applications, so that it is easier for you to debug to find out if there are issues with the application. Okay, so this is fine with us. We can just click on Review plus Create, and finally, once it has been validated, we'll click on Create again. So the deployment has started. It will take a couple of minutes before the deployment is complete. So we'll pause the video and return back when this is done. Okay, the deployment is now complete. So what we are going to do is we are going to go to that particular resource. What we see here is it has a specific URL, the name that we gave, and then the azurewebsites.net. Okay, and the app service plan is ASP-ATCSL, which is Premium 2, P1V2. It is just one application that we have there, and if we click on this URL, the application should open, which it does. Okay, so the application is running, is up, and we are good with everything. Now comes the interesting part, the meat and potatoes of this particular demo. Okay, and what we are going to do next is to create private endpoints. Okay, so we'll scroll down a little and go to networking. Here you will see an option for private endpoint connections, which is in preview. We will click on configure your private endpoints, and right now we don't see anything here. So we'll click on add, and we will give it a name, which is PTE for ATCSL apps. Subscription is what we have. I just have one single subscription, which is pay as you go, it is by default chosen. I'll choose the virtual network, which is vnet-atcsl. And here I have the option to choose between the subnets that I'm going to use. I'll not use a gateway subnet because that will be used to create the virtual network gateway for site-to-site VPN. I created another subnet specifically for the private endpoints, which is snet-pt-atcsl apps, and that is what I'm going to choose. And once that is done, I'll click on OK. So this will again take 2 to 3 minutes to complete. I'll return back when the deployment is done. Okay, the deployment is complete now, and I can see that we have the connection name here, and the connection state is approved, and we have the name that we gave for the private endpoint. If we click on this, we will see that there is a fully qualified domain name. Let me scroll down a little, and it has been assigned a private IP address 10.10.1.4. See, right? So now what has happened is this private endpoint has brought this app services web app into our virtual network, right? And since it is in our virtual network and it has a private IP address, we will no further be allowed to use the public internet to access this particular web app. Do you want to see it? So we'll go back to ATCSL networking, we'll scroll up, go to the overview, and we have the URL here, right? If I click on it, it has given me error 403 forbidden. The web app you have attempted to reach has blocked your access. So no more public access to this particular web app. It has completely been blocked by Azure. Okay. So we are good so far. One additional thing that I would like to do here is to add a custom domain. Okay. So here is the interface where I can add a custom domain. I have the button here, which is add custom domain. I'll click on it. And I can just enter the name here. I have a domain name with one of the registrars and I have already validated it. So I'll just enter the name here, which is kurari.com, and I'll click on validate. What it does when we validate, it will check for the hostname availability and it will also check for the domain ownership. So what it does while checking the domain ownership is to verify that I actually own the domain and I am proving that I own the domain. So since I already proved that this domain is mine, it is giving me 2 green checks. Okay, so I'll just click on add custom domain. So the domain has been added, but you see a warning sign here with a red mark. What it says is that it is not secure and it is giving me to add the binding here. So what I need to do, I just need to upload the PFX certificate here and choose the type of binding and then click on add binding. But I'm not interested in adding the certificate for now. I can create a self-signed certificate and make it work and make this one green as well, but I'm not going to do it. It's not that it will not let me access the application. Okay. So if I go up again on the overview page and I click on the custom domain name that we just added, it will again say that the 404 website not found. There are certain things that we need to do. And what needs to be done? We need to bring this particular domain name from the registrar where I have registered into Azure. How do we do that? Keep in mind, when we are using the private endpoints, we can use the private DNS zone, but there are certain settings that we need to do. The other option is to create a DNS zone. And the third one is to create the DNS server. The DNS server creation is pretty straightforward. You just need one virtual machine where you just deploy the virtual machine first, go into the virtual machine, you configure the role for that particular machine as a DNS server role and configure it the way you want it. Okay. For now, I'm not going to use any virtual machine and I'm also not going to use the private DNS zone. The straightforward method is to use the DNS zone here. I'll go back to my Azure portal and what we are going to do here is we are going to DNS zone. So I'll click on DNS zones. And as of now, you see there is nothing, right? So I'll click on add and select the resource group, scroll down, give this a name. And what name are we going to give it? the same custom domain name which we had assigned to the app. So here I'm going to put the same name, kurari.com. So I have that, and once that is done, I'll click on review plus create, and finally click on create. The DNS zone configuration is ready. I can go to that particular resource. So these are the name servers that are already there. I need to put the values of the name server in the DNS of my kurari.com domain name. Okay, so I need to go back to my domain manager, and here if I scroll down, by default it has certain value for the name servers, and that is what we need to change. So I'll click on change here, scroll down, and click on enter my own name servers. So I have the value here, name server 1, name server 2. So what I just want to do is I'll just copy these values from here, come back to DNS manager and click on paste. What I can also do is I can just go here, copy and paste it, but remember that you need to remove this dot from here. Add more values to it, go back, copy it from here, just paste it. We can just go ahead and click on save. So what is happening now? Now that we have changed the name server from GoDaddy to Azure, all the DNS management for this particular domain name will be done from inside Azure. It will no longer be managed from within GoDaddy. Okay, so if you see here, we are getting that particular message here that we can't display your DNS information because your name servers are managed by us. Okay, so everything has now moved to Azure. So I'll go back to kurari.com, and here I have the DNS zone already configured. What I need to do is add the record sets. Okay, so one is kurari.com, the other one can be www.kurari.com. So one I'll leave as kurari.com. It will automatically add the name as @. So we will leave it as it is, the type as A. For TTL, we will leave as 1 hour, and the IP address, add that particular IP address. Click on OK. I need to add one more record set, and here I'll add www. I will paste the same IP address and I'll click on OK. So now I have 10.10.1.4 and 10.10.1.4 for both without www and with www, and that's the configuration that we are going to have. So any external request that is coming in, since the DNS is being maintained by Azure, it will go to Azure DNS. From there, it will be routed to the DNS zone where kurari.com is being handled. And from here, the request will be routed to the private endpoints. So here we are done with the second part of the custom domain name and the DNS zones. We are done with that. The third thing we need to do is to work with the virtual network gateways. So I'll click on virtual network gateways and I'll click on add. For the name, we will choose VGW for virtual network gateway, and this is for the ATCSL apps, and that is the name that we are going to give. We will keep it to Central US. For the gateway type, it is VPN, not the express route, because we are going to configure site-to-site VPN. For the VPN type, it is route based. For SKU, we have different options here. I'll choose VPN GW1, and for the generation, I have no other option other than generation 1. So I'll keep it to generation 1. For virtual network, I'll choose the one that we have. And if you notice, it has automatically taken the gateway subnet, which is 10.10.2.0/28. So it has taken that. I'll scroll down a little. Here, I need to create a public IP address. This public IP address will be used to create a successful tunnel, a successful connection with the gateway that we are going to create at the other end with perimeter 81. So we need to create a public IP address. I'll give one a name, which is PIP for public IP address for ATCSL apps. I leave the rest of the options as such. I'll just click on review and create, And once that has been reviewed, successfully validated, I'll click on create. So this is definitely going to take a while. So I'll pause the video, go ahead and grab a cup of coffee for myself and get back again. Okay, so now the deployment is complete. What we are going to do is go to that particular resource. Okay, so we are on our virtual network gateway, and here you see that we have the public IP address that has been assigned to this particular virtual network gateway, which is 13.67.217.190. For now, we don't have any connections as of yet because we have not configured the other side of the tunnel. We don't have that details, but that is the next step that we are going to perform. So we will go to perimeter 81, and this is the interface that we have for creating the tunnel and the gateway from perimeter 81 side. Okay, so now if you see, the interface here is pretty intuitive. You can just go and very easily create your resources. And the first thing here we need to do is to create a network. If you see here, I have created already one network. If I click on the network here at the high level, it says that I have the available gateway licenses 0 of 1. It means that I cannot create any other gateway. I was just allowed to have one gateway, which I've already created, but I can create multiple tunnels on the same gateway. Okay, so and that is what we are going to do. So if we click on this, we are back on the same page where we started. I have here one of the regions, which is Toronto, and then the gateways, which has the public IP address of 165.227.40.159, and one tunnel is already there, but I can go ahead and add another tunnel. Here I have two options. One is to create the IPsec site-to-site tunnel, and the other one is perimeter 81 connector. So I'll click on IPsec site-to-site tunnel and click on continue, and we will be presented with an interface where we need to provide more details. So I'll give this one name, and here I have the shared secret. I can generate one, and I'll have to use the same when I am creating the local network gateway and the connections between the local network gateway and the virtual network gateway in Azure. Okay, so for now, just leave it as it is and scroll down. I have to enter the public IP address. And what public IP address it is? It is the public IP address of the second end of the tunnel. That is the Azure side of the public IP address. So I'll go back here, click on overview, and here I have the public IP address. So I'll just copy it, come back to perimeter 81 and just paste the IP address. So for the remote ID, you will notice that it is not a mandatory field. So if I leave it as it is, it will just use the same public IP address as the remote ID. So I can just go ahead and paste the same thing here. From the perimeter 81 gateway proposal subnets, the subnet that it provides, it gives us an option to use any of the subnets or use the proposed subnet. So I'll use the proposed subnet. And from the remote gateway perspective, which is the Azure side of the gateway, I'll choose the specified subnets. And here we need to provide the IP address range of the virtual network that we had created in Azure. And it was 10.10.0.0/16. I'll scroll down. For the IKE version, I'll choose IKE version v2. And there are certain settings like IKE lifetime, tunnel lifetime, and there are other settings in terms of the integrity phase 1, phase 2. We have to keep in mind that this perimeter 81 is also used with AWS, with Google Cloud, and there are other cloud services provider. So for Azure, there are specific settings. For IKE lifetime, it has to be 9 hours. From the tunnel lifetime perspective also, we need to give it as 9 hours. And we will leave the dead peer detection policy and the timeout to 10 seconds and 30 seconds, which are default. We'll scroll down again. I told you that there are certain specific settings for Azure, so I'll remove this and I'll choose SHA-1. Similarly, for phase 2 also, I'll remove SHA-256 and I'll choose SHA-1. From the Diffie-Hellman groups, phase 1 and phase 2, I'll remove 14 and I'll choose 2. So these are specific settings from Perimeter 81 side to connect to Azure Gateway Tunnel. If there are certain differences, it will not connect. So once that is done, I'll click on Add Tunnel. I'll scroll down. It is saying that it is deploying the tunnel and it will be up soon. Okay, so here you go. Now I have this tunnel completely up and running. I'll go back to my virtual network gateway on Azure, and then I will have to create a local network gateway. So I'll just type in local network gateways. I'll click on it. And once we are there, we'll click on Add. We will give this a name. So LGW for local network gateway, and it is for ATCSL. So LGW-ATCSL, the IP address range. Now, if you see here, the public IP address of your local gateway. What is the public IP address of our Perimeter 81? So I'll go here. This is the public IP address. So I'll just copy that. And the address space. Now the address space, if you remember here, was given to me as 10.255.0.0/16, and that is what I'm going to use. Okay, so I can simply copy it by selecting and go back to Azure, give it the address space, and once that is done, I'll choose the resource group, and for the location, I'll choose as Central US and click on Create. So it will not take much time and it will be quickly deployed. So we'll wait for it to be completed. Okay, so it is done now. We'll go to the resource and our local gateway has been deployed. It has the public IP address of Perimeter 81 and also the private IP address space that was provided to us, right? So I can create a connection between my local gateway, which represents Perimeter 81, and the virtual network gateway of Azure from here itself, or I can go to the virtual network gateway and from there I can create the connections. The choice is completely yours. So I'll click on connections here and click on Add. I'll give this a name which is between the LGW, which is the local network gateway, and the virtual network gateway for ATCSL. So I try to keep the names as simple as possible, but still in a way that it is easily recognizable. So that is what I have done here. And the connection type here, so here it shows to be site-to-site IPsec. The virtual network gateway, I'll choose as the one that we had already created. So it is easy. The local network gateway is the one from where we are creating the connection. The shared key is something that we need to bring in from the Perimeter 81 side. So I will click on Edit Tunnel, click on the I, copy everything here, go back to the Azure portal, paste the key, and the IKE protocol, I'll keep it the same as we did in the Perimeter 81 side. It is IKE version 2, and click on OK. So now what it is doing is, it is trying to create a connection between Perimeter 81, which is represented by the local gateway, and the virtual network gateway on our side, which is the Azure side. If you look here, the status currently shows to be unknown, but the connection type is site to site. So by the time I can go to the virtual network gateways, and let me show you from there of how the connections look like. So I can click on connection, see the same name appears here as well. So it doesn't matter where you're creating the connections from, they both are the same thing. Okay, mind you, as of now we have not created the point to site VPN. It is still to be configured. This is not about creating the point to site connectivity, rather the site to site connectivity using Perimeter 81, just to show how the private endpoint works for the app services web app so that it can securely be connected from the on-premises systems. So we will go back to connections again, and now the status shows as connected. Woo, we are done. So if we click on it and if we see the details, it shows me the status as connected. Okay, now what we should do is we should try to connect from our on-premises system and see if it works or not. But before that, let me show you something. So if I go to my app services now and click on it, let me try to access the URL after configuring the virtual network gateway and the local network gateway and creating the connection between them. So it is loading. What it should do is it should give us the timeout error that it is not able to connect, because again, we are not yet connected to the Azure network since we are trying to access this from the public internet, which is outside of the corporate internet. Now I have the Perimeter 81 application already downloaded. I have opened that interface. I have the name here. I can click on connect and we are connected. Okay. So now that we are connected, we can access the application. So I'll minimize this. Now if I refresh the page, will it show me the page? Yes, of course, because now we are connected to the virtual network using the site-to-site VPN. So that concludes the demo on how we can best utilize the private endpoints and create a site-to-site connectivity using Perimeter 81 to connect to the application hosted on Azure from the on-premises or from the corporate network. So finally, we are at the end of this how to tips and tricks session for Azure Administration and Azure Architect. So we try to understand what the private endpoints are and how they can be best utilized. In our scenario, we used it with the App Services web app. Instead of using the App Services environment, we used the private endpoints to bring down the cost and to bring the App Services web app into the virtual network that we had created, so that we can have an intranet-like application that can be accessed only from within the corporate network. We configured the site-to-site VPN and we also created the gateway tunnel using Perimeter 81. I hope you guys liked this session as much as I did being your trainer. In case you want to download the training material, you can go to azuretraining.com. You can follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn. My Twitter handle is @mstechtrainings and my LinkedIn URL is given for your reference. So if you guys enjoyed it, do like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much. And until we meet next time, keep azuring.